water. Oh,
Imagine.
he does things
What a
like that.
gift. Yeah. Wow.
All right, well, shall we
Far away
wait a
is
little
that
bit, or
Where the
think,
parents
okay,
were.
pretty good, all right.
We want to encourage people
Okay.
to show up on time.
Yeah, that's right, so, well, good evening.
Good evening.
It's great to be back. I'm Robert. I play piano. I'll talk a little bit, tell some stories. I have new stories from last time because of our conversation with Helen, particularly. So, let's see. Larkin is out of town, or just not here today. I don't know about out of town. But at any rate, I'd like to start with an improvisation, and we had an idea here. You wanted me to do something with the Moonlight Sonata of Beethoven, and then you wanted me to add a little Furley's. And let's make this interesting. So that's two pieces by Beethoven
Okay.
as a starting point. I'm not going to play the whole, I'm just going to quote them. Now, what else should I throw into this mysterious musical stew?
I love Debussy.
You want a little Debussy in there? Okay, very good. How about a couple more things to it?
Scott job.
A little Scotch. Okay, maybe one more.
A spiritual.
A spiritual. Okay, well, I can try. So, and I heard Bach. I'm starting to forget, but I'll try to mix it up. I'll mix it all up. Let's see what happens. Okay, so here we go. Moonlight Sonata, Furley's, a little Debussy, a little Scott Joplin, a little Bach.
Remember your audience, we don't remember.
Yeah, well, I don't remember. I like to mix bizarre things, and so that's what we're gonna do.
And spiritual.
And a spiritual, right.
Hey, Preston.
I tried to do a little, go from Moonlight to Debussy, and then somehow into a spiritual, but also ragtime. I don't know. It was okay. So now I'm going to play something that I've been working on for a while, and it's new for me. Remember I mentioned every time I've been here that I'm doing this violin theme. I'm obsessed with the violin, and it doesn't go away. I keep expecting this to go away, and as my obsession keeps growing, I keep finding more things to do. So, I'm going to play for you the first movement of Beethoven's Violin Concerto. Now, what on earth? Now, here's the thing. Beethoven arranged this piece himself, or readapted it, refashioned it into a piano concerto. Oh yeah, please come in. And it's not done as much as a piano concerto, but it is done. The great Daniel Barenboim played this on the piano with orchestra. And to make it even more bizarre, what I've done is I've sort of made my own arrangement of Beethoven's arrangement of his own piece. So to include what the orchestra is doing. I don't have 10 hands and I can't do everything the orchestra does, but to try to play, what the orchestra is doing as well. Because it's not for a single violin or a single piano, it's a piece for soloist and orchestra. So at any rate, again, this is the Beethoven Violin Concerto, first movement. Beethoven's own arrangement for piano, and I'm adding my own version to include orchestra. Okay, some history of the piece. Beethoven wrote it in 1806, and it was actually sort of a flop. It was not taken very well. The first performance was not received very well because, first of all, the first movement is very long. I'm only going to do the first today. It's like 25 minutes long. I mean, a Mozart symphony, the entire thing is 20 minutes long, perhaps, or Haydn. But this is just one of the many ways in which Beethoven was of a totally different mindset and a different zeitgeist from what came before him. He was truly an innovator. And part of this, post-French Revolution, it's the era of Napoleon, who he had very complex feelings of. But because early Romanticism, early 19th century, it's a whole new mindset. And just the 25-minute first movement, that's normal for Beethoven, okay? And maybe not for anyone else. So that's one reason. Another reason that it wasn't so popular, I think, is because it's a very subtle and meditative piece, this concerto. So it's not your regular storm and stress Beethoven that we're used to, that we think of. It's meditative and quiet, but here's the thing. I found it fascinating that he wrote this piece shortly after he knew that he was going deaf, and he made his peace with that. So you could say it's Beethoven being very philosophical about that, because he really did not, the stages of grief, he did not want to accept this. Can you imagine a musician like Beethoven losing his hearing? And when he writes this violin concerto, he made his peace with that. And so I think that's what this music is about, and that's why it's so profound, and one of the ways in which it's so profound. So, and finally I'll say this about Beethoven. Leonard Bernstein said that if you isolate any of the melodies or motives from a Beethoven piece, just by itself, not the entire piece, a lot of the time it's not that interesting. It's even banal. If I take something like this famous idea, well, obviously we know that piece, but think about it. That's not a melody. It's almost primitive. It's just a rhythmic idea. But Bernstein says, but it's what Beethoven does with it that makes it magic and extraordinary. And Beethoven's compositional process was very different from those before him, like, say, Mozart. Mozart would hear the music in his head. Of course, this is not a criticism of Mozart, but Mozart was not he wasn't changing tradition, really. He was just perfecting it. He knew all the traditions, and he was able to just conjure these incredible melodies and things almost just in his head, fully formed. He'd write it down, no revisions in many cases. not Beethoven. Beethoven, we have his manuscripts. His handwriting was sloppy. He would cross things out. He would rewrite and edit. We have, there's candle wax on his drafts. Even his tears, his favorite Austrian wine stains on his. He was a bit of a slob, too. He was also a person who was maybe the first in music who lived independently from, he was an independent artist, in other words. He wasn't employed by a patron or by someone. He had patrons, but he was a self, what's the word? Self-made artist. So anyway, that's probably enough background. I'll say finally one more thing. I had a professor, and he said it very well. He said something to the effect of, Beethoven is like Tolstoy in music. And he went on to explain that Beethoven and Tolstoy, obviously what they created is beautiful. It's aesthetic. But they go beyond aesthetics into, this professor says, ethics, which means that, it somehow touches us on a very human level. Our human capacity for compassion and such. Tolstoy talked about this in his essay, What is Art? He was describing the backstage of an opera theater. And he starts by saying, this is really, if you think about all the suffering in the world, this is nonsense. Why do we do this? Why do we have, opera and costumes and music? And then he concludes the thought by saying, but if one person walks out of the performance and feels a little bit more tenderness, a little bit softer, a little bit more compassion in their heart, then it's succeeded. And I think Beethoven is like that, because I think Beethoven is so human, and his struggle, the struggle with his deafness, the struggle even just writing the music, it's something it's just so incredible. And anyway, Beethoven speaks for itself. So I'm going to play again. This is the Violin Concerto First Movement, Beethoven's own adaptation of it into a piano piece. So let's see what happens. and I was very afraid to play it in public because it's so long. But I don't think it could be shorter, because I mean, it needs that time to be there. So anyway, I'm gonna play much shorter pieces now. Don't worry.
Well, I thought I could hear the other instruments in the orchestra, particularly the brass.
Oh, thank you. That's what I was going for. Yeah.
And
Well,
not sure heard many of the winds other than the flute.
the flute, yeah. There's one other thing. Oh, yeah.
I'm just curious, number one, how long it took you to memorize it? Number two, what is your method for memorizing it? I mean, I've memorized parts of musicals, and I've done a lot of singing, but that just blows me away because it's so long, and a lot of it is like a fugue, and it just keeps repeating. But how do you do that?
Well, so I made my own arrangement here. I'm trying to include the orchestra as much as I can. And the fact of writing it out, I didn't actually write the whole thing, but what I did was I took the orchestra part and I just wrote in with pencil, into the piano part, just like grafting on. So that took a while. I mean, I have to admit, I learned this kind of in a hurry because I wanted to finish it, to get it under my belt. So I learned it, I memorized it, took me about a couple of weeks, but it was stupid because I was staying up really late every night and I was driving myself crazy and it didn't stick. And then when I stopped trying so hard and just took a more sane approach, it started to stick. But two things made the memory really work. One was the fact that I was writing my own arrangement, actually somehow made it more, it's like if you write something, you remember it more. So that's one thing. Another thing is, in school, I studied music theory like everyone else. And I never thought too much. I wasn't bad at it, but I wasn't great. But I never thought too much of it. Not too long ago, I heard an interview with a jazz pianist, Barry Harris, who died recently. And he said, classical pianists don't know the chords of the pieces they're playing. And I thought, wow, that's true. What if I tried that? Because that's what jazz players do. And so I learned the chords, essentially. And so I remember that as like the backbone, and then you can put, the details in. So that's part of it. And knowing the form, because there is a form. I mean, there's a theme, and then there's a development. And so all of that helps. And then, so those are sort of tricks, I guess, but there's really no trick. It's just repetition, throwing it against the wall until it sticks, working on sections, suffering, pulling your teeth out, and then one day you sort of have it, but then you sort of don't, and then, so maybe, is that my brain? No, so, because sometimes you get a little, there was one night I was working on this, and I thought, it was like 2 a.m., I said, okay, you know what, stop, let's just go to bed, but anyway, it's just, there's no trick. It's really just, so at any rate, that's the piece. And there's one thing I wanted to say also, there's something called a cadenza here. Cadenza in a concerto is traditionally where the soloist will improvise. And Beethoven he did not write a cadenza for the violin concerto. This is really interesting. He did not. Most violinists play Fritz Kreisler's glorious cadenza. Nathan Milstein, the great violinist, he wrote his own cadenza. Speaking about improv, and that's what it was. In a Mozart concerto, especially, you just would improvise. So Beethoven wrote a cadenza for this piano version, and that's what I played. And it's a bonkers cadenza. A cadenza is usually for the instrument by itself. Beethoven, for some reason, wrote a cadenza for piano and timpani. That's why I was doing all this business. That's the timpani. And it's bonkers because it's the piano and then suddenly the timpani comes in. So anyway, it's an interesting history to this piece. And I like that it's the violin concerto, all violinists play it. But on the piano, and it's a piano concerto. Beethoven wrote it himself. But it's a bit that's shelved, usually not done. So, but anyway, I'm going to play some real short, nice, sweet things. And I think I really owe it to Helen and to everyone here to play the Maurice Ravel, Daniel Aricourt piece in the form of a habanera again. And so here's the story. I played it here last time, and I failed to look up Daniel Aricourt. So we'll get to that. The piece in the form of a habanera. Habanera is a Cuban dance originally. Cuban music is a wonderful mix of Spanish music, African rhythms from West Africa. My beloved professor was from Cuba. I think I played a Cuban piece here once. So the rhythm of a habanera is bum, 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 bum. And if you know Bizet's Carmen, there's a famous habanera. Yeah, da, dee, da, 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 da. I can't sing, but very popular dance in Europe in the time of Bizet and Ravel, and I think in France it was just very fashionable. So Maurice Ravel writes this piece in the style of a habanera, in the form of a habanera. It's a vocalise, which means it's for a solo voice with no words. If you've ever been in the car and hummed something without words, like la da da da, that's a vocalise. So if someone catches you, just tell them, no, no, monsieur, it's a vocalise. You know, it just sounds. So I'm just joking. It just sounds more, you know. So that's what it is. It's played on the violin frequently. It's played on the flute a lot. And this solo piano version I found is by a guy named Daniel Aricourt. Last time I played it here, and I said, forgive me, I failed to look up Daniel Aricourt. I was thinking I'd read about him later, and I would find out who he was, and I'm sure nobody, I've never heard of him, so I don't know if anyone's heard of him. Well, Helen comes to me last time afterwards. She says, you're not going to believe this, but Daniel Aricourt was my neighbor. Daniel and Jane, his wife, were my neighbors right here in Greensboro for a number of years. I almost fainted. I said, are you kidding me? She said, no, they walked their dogs and we talked. They're lovely people. And, Jane, well, I'll talk about Jane a bit, but so she said, Helen emailed me some information about Daniel Aricourt. I was reading, and it was incredible. The guy, he was born in France around 1900. And I have the sheet music, the piece, the arrangement is like 1920 something. So, he obviously knew Ravel, he knew Debussy, and then I think in the 1930s when the Second World War was, about to erupt, he came to America. And he taught in several places. He taught at UNC Greensboro right here. That's what I know. Yeah, and so people, and he taught there for a number of years, and then he retired, and he married Jane Aricourt herself, is a wonderful pianist and composer, I think, and just loved it here, stayed here. And to quote my uncle Boris, who we lost recently, he loved Paris, to the point of we would make fun of him because he would see a nice town, small town, and it could be anywhere, New Jersey, North Carolina. He moved to North Carolina before he died, and he would always say with his thick Russian accent, he'd say, it's just like Paris. Exactly, even better, because don't have to fly, it's free. But anyway, I really miss it. But at any rate, I couldn't believe. So he loved Greensboro, and so I was at Wellspring today playing a small concert over there, and I said, here's the name. Does anybody know the name Aricourt? And half the people raised their hands. I said, oh my. The lady who worked there came up to me with a pen and pencil, said, write Jane Aricourt a note. She was here about an hour ago visiting some friends. So the moral of the story is, if you're going to speak about someone, look them up before, because you never know who is literally their neighbor at some point in time. So anyway, here is the piece. I'll play it.
Very good, Helen. All right, good.
It's just that Daniel Héricourt, the world of France at the turn of the last century, and then Greensboro, right now, today, I missed his wife by an hour. And it's just two different worlds. I love these clashes of worlds, like, for example, I don't want to talk too much, but Stravinsky lived in California and in LA. So did many people, like Rachmaninoff lived in Southern California, Thomas Mann. They all ended up there. And Stravinsky, who's so Russian and just, he had this favorite taco place in the desert. And he asked his assistant and helper, Robert Kraft, had to drive him out to this one taco place, and he would just eat it, ravenously. It's just funny to me because it's these clashes of cultures. I think it's wonderful. So anyway, let's see. I'm going to play. I did this last time also. The Beethoven took up most of my new headspace, so I have old pieces for the rest. This is the famous meditation from Thais by Massenet. It's a violin piece also. This 1891 opera, like I told you last time, I'm sorry to repeat, but the story is of this young woman, Thais, who lives in Alexandria, Egypt. It's the end of the Roman Empire. And she adheres to the Greco-Roman gods and goddesses, especially Venus, Aphrodite. And this young, early Christian monk is given the task to convert her, and somewhere along the way he realizes that he's in love with her. Because, of course, it's an opera, so you must have a love story somewhere. And it's played on the violin as an interlude throughout the opera, and violinists do this as a standalone piece, because it's a beautiful, beautiful piece. So here it is, Meditation from Thais by Massenet.
thank you. That,
Oh.
in my humble opinion, I think it's one of the most beautiful pieces ever written.
Me too. And I have a funny story. I maybe told this last. I played this at another place, and a lady came to me with a big smile. She said, "Clearly, it's superior on the violin." And I said, "Well, thank you very much." No, but it's fun. I mean, I had another. I'm going to write a book one day, but there was two people came. I played the Beethoven when it was a little. It's still a little fresh for me, but this was a few days ago. It was still there were. I had a few spots. Okay, and these two people come up, and one person was saying, "Were those? Did you add some improvisation into there?" And this other lady said, "No, those were mistakes." And I said, "Well, okay. Yes, I make mistakes. Yes, I do. But I should have remembered. There's a great quote from Beethoven. He said, 'To hit a wrong note is okay, but to play one note without passion is inexcusable.'" But I didn't remember that quote. I should have said.
Oh.
Anyway, it's okay. I never. It wasn't. I found it really funny actually because Anyway, I did not find it. Yeah, mistakes happen. You're human. I mean, what are you gonna? So okay. Do you want to hear something? I'm gonna play a little gospel soon.
Okay.
Do you want to hear maybe one? I can do one or two more classical. Do you want to hear something more bombastic? Like Paganini, which I've done here before. Do you want to hear some more of these soft? What's the mood tonight? What do you?
The latter, for me.
Okay, is that okay? Soft. Okay, so I'm gonna do Dvorak's. This is songs my mother taught me. I'll play it. gospel here. Here's a famous old gospel number. This is, He's got the whole world in his hands.
Was that Wayne Newton that became famous singing that?
Maybe, I don't know. I was just basing this on a recording of Mahalia Jackson, how she said, not Michael, but Mahalia. So that was, I told you that story. So here is one more, this is going to be more of a country gospel type thing. Yeah, I told you maybe my father's Southern. My mother's Russian, my father's Southern. Maybe I'll tell this sort of has nothing to do, but this is a great story. I don't know why I've had these funny things happen to me in my life. I'm lucky. So I lived in Texas for a while. I went to school in Texas to study with a wonderful Russian pianist who was close to Clyburn and ended up in Texas. So I went to Texas, followed him there, and I'm from New Jersey, so even with my dad being Southern, it was culture shock. It was definitely, and there was a day I was back, was at a Walmart parking lot, all right, and some lady was crossing in front of me, and she just stopped. I don't know why, she just froze. And so I was standing there, and then I hear what sounds like an explosion. And I look to my right, and this giant truck is backing up into my car, destroying so my window was shattered, the door was messed up, but luckily it was the passenger side. It was a tree surgeon's truck, and these guys got out, and they were, I was upset. I said, what did you do? And he's like, sir, I confess, I wasn't looking out the rear view window. And, and he said, finally, I ain't trying to weasel myself out of this. I messed up, and I messed up bad. But he didn't say messed up. He said, but I'm not going to say. Anyway, so, okay, but the funny part is, this is where country music comes in handy. So his boss came, and it was like straight out of a Western movie. His boss is this guy with a cowboy hat, and he's got two other guys with cowboy hats surrounding him. I don't know why. And he just comes up to me. All you needed was tumbleweed and some music. And he just comes up real slow, and he leans on my car, and he looks at me, and he says, sir, are you in the medical profession? And my father told me later, I told him this story, he said probably the only person that he's ever seen in his life who resembled you was his doctor. So I don't know, but that's my dad. So he looks at me, and he's, And I said, no, I play the piano. I play classical piano. And he looked at me like I was from Mars. And I didn't know, it was a very awkward long silence. And I just blurted out, I said, I like Hank Williams. And he just, and he looked at me, he said, junior or senior? And I said, senior, of course. And he just pats me on the back and says, you're all right. You're all right. So anyway, there was many, the guy who hit my car, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but the guy who hit my car, he went into the Walmart, he said, I bought you a little present. I'm so sorry. They were really nice. They even invited me to a cookout, which I now regret. I should have gone because I'd have more stories. But, I mean, they're good people. But the gift that the gentleman gave me was a tin of cherry-flavored chewing tobacco. So, which I did not use. I had no use for it.
You didn't even try it?
No, I'm a boring person. So anyway,
What happened to the car?
well, the car got fixed. It was they paid for it. They were very gracious, but it was, I'm very glad that I knew about Hank Williams. So let's, coming back to the music, is that I learned this music from my dad. I learned it from him. He plays and sings country music. So I'm going to play a very southern country gospel version of an old hymn called "There Is a Fountain." So. Sorry for the long stories. I just couldn't help it. But sometimes music evokes these things for me. But anyway, thank you all so much. Thanks, Larkin, for having me. And I always love to come see you all. So I'll see you soon.
Oh,
I hope.
looking forward to it.
I'll be back. Every month I think so.
We enjoyed it.
Oh, love it.
Thank you.
Was that